Hi, everybody. How are you? I hope you're doing well. I have my window open, so I hope there's no weird noises coming in, but I will mute myself here in a second. So I'm Christy with Tuleyome. I'm looking at some names. Some of you are not familiar to me, so I will introduce myself quickly. I've been with Tuleyome for about 5 years and do a lot of different things and happy to be here. Andrew is speaking tonight. He is going to give us the rundown on trail building. I think we were talking earlier, and I think everybody's kind of got an idea of looking at a trail, how it probably was constructed, but Andrew's going to go through the beginning, the concept, getting agency permissions, all the things that have to happen before the construction starts. So I will mute myself and I'm going to turn my camera off. And if you would like to either put questions in the chat or jot them down so we don't miss anything, and then we can cover them at the end, whatever you want to do, whatever Andrew is comfortable with, we'll just let it flow. So Andrew, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. So I'm Andrew Fulks. I'm one of the founders, a board member and president for almost 20 years, and now on the advisory council. And trail building has always been my passion. I'm a landscape architect who grew up in the Bay Area using a lot of the trails there. And when I came up here, I really wanted to contribute by building trails for the next generation. And so what I'm going to go over tonight is kind of a case study of one of our trail projects that we've been working on for quite a few years, Valley Vista Regional Park above Rumsey, and talk a little about not just the trail construction, because a lot of people, especially those that have come out and worked with us on trail projects, but the whole process basically of how we conceptualize, design, get permission to do it, to the construction itself, and some kind of highlights of the type of methods that we use. There are many, many different kinds of methods for building trails, and I'll touch on some of those in addition to talking about how we do it, because most of what we do is volunteer-based versus commercial. So there's a lot of different tools and types of construction one can do. But I'll just give kind of the overview. I'll give you some resources, try to throw some links in the chat for folks that want to look at some of these things further. And talk about some of the future of what we're going to be doing with this regional park, where Tuleyome has built 100% of the trails out there in this public park, and have, another couple miles that we're going to be building out there over the next couple of years. So first thing I'm going to do is start off with a discussion of kind of like, how do we get to the point where we actually want to build a trail? And so a lot of what I've found is that most agencies don't have a lot of resources. And while there are grants that one can get, and we have done grants and have a number of grants that are out there right now that we're applying for to build trails, a lot of the agencies themselves don't necessarily have those resources. So as a nonprofit, what we do is oftentimes go find those resources, whether they be volunteer labor or whether we're actually doing the ones applying on the agency's behalf for grants to either pay a contractor or for us to pay our staff to do the work on behalf of the agency, because a lot of the agencies are understaffed as well. However, there's very much a need for multi-use trails out there. And I think that's evidenced by basically how busy they are once we build them. So it is one of those build it and they will come moments. We've been able to open up quite a bit of public land to the public through our trail building processes. So what I'm going to do here is first, I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me, I've got multiple screens, so I'm going to throw all the people off to one side. And all right, so you should be able to see Google Earth up here, and making sure I'm sharing the correct screen. So the one we're going to use as the case study is Valley Vista Regional Park. And so I'm going to zoom out and give you a little bit of context of where we are. So here's Sacramento over here, and Davis right down here, Woodland up here. This green that you see is Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. And down here at the upper end of the Cape Bay Valley, northern end, is Valley Vista Regional Park.
Andrew, I'm not seeing Google Earth, I'm seeing an email screen.
You're seeing an email screen. Oh, how weird. I think it's here. Let me try to. Oh, looks like it's made me screen one. That's funny. It was on the other one. It swapped screens on me. Okay, can you see the Google Earth now?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yes, okay. All right, we'll zoom back out again. Yeah, so here we are, Sacramento, City of Davis, City of Woodland. The green outline is Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. Valley Vista Regional Park is a little over 600 acres. That is Yolo County Regional Park, the upper end of the Cape Valley, inside the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, which is, again, this green line as we're closer in. And this darker color that you see here is Bureau of Land Management public lands, so federal public lands. The project that we're talking about today is on county property. And this park, the background history of it is that the county bought it to add to the park system quite a few years ago. I forget the exact date because it's over a dozen years, and once things get beyond that, I start losing track. But the cool thing about this is it's right at the upper end of the Cape Valley, and down here is Camp Haswell County Park, which is undeveloped, but an old Boy Scout camp, and it was primarily used as river access, and folks that kayak the section of river between Highway 16, Bear Creek, Cache Creek confluence, and down to Camp Haswell here use this as a takeout, and sometimes even as a put-in that might float further downstream to Nichols County Park. And this property was formerly known as the Otis property and acquired by the county using a couple state grants. And the county ultimately wanted to build trails on this, but didn't have the funding to do it. And after a number of years of kind of waiting for grants to happen and them not happening, I said, you know, I need another hobby, so I'm going to build the trails for you guys if that's okay. And the county said, sure, you know, this is great. We are looking for these trails to be built. At the time, I had just completed the Berryessa Peak Trail and was kind of looking for the next round of trail projects to be involved in, because unlike some people that may say, you know, collect model trains, I like to build trails. So everyone needs a hobby. In this case, it's a hobby that I get to enjoy and that other people get to enjoy when I'm done with it. So with a lot of these trail projects, it's if it's conceived of by a nonprofit, or even if it's conceived of by an agency, it has to go through some manner of review process. And so with this being a county park, we had to make sure that when we were designing and proposing trails for this, that it fit within the county's vision for the property. So I'm going to try and make administration interesting. So bear with me here, because most of what we do before we actually put a shovel into the ground is administration, right? It's convincing the powers that be to allow the trail to be built. It's doing all the environmental documentation that allows the trail to be built, meeting the legal requirements for the trail to be built before we actually build the trail. So the first thing we did was we were involved in the county parks master planning process, which took about a year of master planning for all of the county parks, of which this was part. And as part of that, we were pushing and promoting for the idea that this be a park with more sort of passive recreation, meaning hiking trails versus a more active recreation like off-road vehicles and such. And the terrain is really best suited here for pedestrian use, though it is open for mountain biking and horseback riding if you are so inclined. I know a number of folks that have mountain biked it. It's a pretty hairy ride. Most of the terrain up here is pretty steep and pretty rugged. So I could have probably done it 20 years ago, but I would not attempt it now without you finding me kind of at the bottom of the hill here by Highway 16. So once we had worked on getting it included within the county parks master plan that they wanted to have trails built on this property, then we went to the next step, which is the environmental documentation. And so before I get to that, I'm going to say that this process for having your trail projects included in master plans is pretty universal, regardless of which agency you're working on, right? So in this case, we're dealing with the county. We have built trails on federal property. We've built trails on parks and open space district property. We have coordinated trail markers and trail crossings from state property to federal property. So we've done a lot of the different work in between. And the key thing with all of that is the idea of the trail in the agency's internal master planning documents. Because before agencies do anything, they have to have a big plan for what it is they're doing. They're not just going to go, oh, you're going to build this one-off trail, because that might conflict with something they want to do with the property first. So most agencies will have a master planning process of different scales, whether it's a specific plan for a park, whether it's a specific plan for a wildlife area, state wildlife area, or whether it's a resource area management plan like the Bureau of Land Management does, where it's for a multi-county master plan for what happens on the lands. And as a nonprofit, Tuleyome's been involved in those planning processes at all of those levels. And so what we do as an NGO, right, is we are advocates. So we can say, all right, we really want trails because that's one of our passions. So what trails are out there? What can we link into? What can be standalone? And so we internally can come up with our own ideas, and then we can work collaboratively with those agencies during their master planning processes to try and see whether our ideas mesh with the agency's direction, the agency's desires. And then where we find those areas where we're in agreement, that's where we end up with those trails being included in their documents. So things like the Berryessa Peak Trail was allowed in Bureau of Land Management planning documents in a very general sense of once public access was accessible to this BLM parcel, then X number of miles of trails could be built. So once Tuleyome was able to create that public access through an easement, then that sort of unlocked the ability to build some of those trails. Similarly, with this county park, as the discussion tonight, we had the idea of building this trail system in the approved by the county supervisor's parks master plan. So then after that, we could go to county staff and say, all right, we're ready to start. Let's do the next step, which is the environmental documentation. So with any of your agencies, you're going to do some level of environmental documentation. Without getting into the real weeds, because there's entire professions that deal with this as consultants, the gist of it is with state entities, be it a county, city, or a state wildlife area with Department of Fish and Wildlife, you're going to be doing environmental documents under the California Environmental Quality Act. If you are working with a federal agency, you're going to be doing environmental documents under NEPA, which is, I believe, the National Environmental Policy Act. So a little bit different processes, a little bit different mitigation requirements, but generally the same idea that you are looking at a project, and in our case, building out these trails, and you're looking at what the potential environmental impacts are, and then what potential mitigations you might need to do. Now, most of these projects where you're building by hand footpaths, they're either minor alterations to land and they're considered categorically exempt, or they have mitigated negative declarations. Basically, the idea being that any mitigations tend to be very, very small for what is a fairly minor disturbance overall when you're talking about, footpaths. Without getting into all of those specific details, again, the point being, it's a process you follow, and generally the county or the federal agency or the state agency are taking the lead on those documents. So for Berryessa Peak Trail, for example, we had to do environmental documents with the Bureau of Land Management and with Napa County, because we were building trail on BLM property, federal, and on local property, the easement held by the county. In this particular parcel that we're looking at here, these trails are all on the county park property. And so it was just a county process that we had to do. So we underwent CEQA. We worked on that with the county. So what did we do first? First thing we did was we routed where all these trails would go. So we said, okay, we walked them, even though they didn't exist, we walked the routes. And we did observations for things like special status species, biological surveys to see whether or not there are any plants or animals that we need to avoid, cultural resource surveys to see whether there are any cultural resources that need to be avoided or impacted by the project. And if so, shifting the location of potential trail alignment to account for that, to avoid any of those resources. Luckily with this, there really wasn't anything that showed up, particularly things like Native American cultural artifacts within this zone, very, very rich in tribal history, but not so much when you're on the side slopes that we're talking about, because while certainly used for hunting, would not have been areas of inhabitation. And you'll see why when we show you the photos of how steep some of this stuff is. So once you've done the environmental documentation, you've gone through that process and then had it approved by whichever agency is sponsoring the environmental documentation, in this case, Yolo County, and it's approved by the county, gets sent to the state clearinghouse for review. Once it's been at the state clearinghouse for, I think, 30 days, 45 days, it's essentially adopted, and then we are clear to start our work. So that's kind of the background information of everything we have to do. Then, of course, now that we're clear to do the work, we've got to actually go out and figure out where we're going to put it specifically. So that is a lot of me going back and forth, up and down the side slopes, looking for where the best design might be for a lot of these trails. So this gives you some of the ideas of the things I'm looking for when I'm designing a trail. So as a landscape architect, I'm thinking about, what do people experience when they're walking this alignment, when they're walking the trail? What are the views? Where are they located, right? I generally like to locate trails on ridge tops or kind of halfway down slopes, because when you're elevated, you really get those views, those vistas. So if you're down at the bottom of the canyon, that can have advantages if your experience is one where you're trying to have a very shaded trail, or if you've got, say, a perennial water body and you want to be walking along the creek. But a lot of what we have, the canyons tend to be pretty steep and eroded in these hills. And so walking on some of the grass slopes and the side slopes gives you this sort of intermediate view where you can see the ridge tops, but you can also be looking down into the canyons. Doing things like walking through oak woodlands. This is also something that we find is really enjoyable when you're trying to build that trail alignment. And you're trying to put that alignment in such that you feel like you're meandering through the forest, right? It's not an engineering exercise where you're just saying, I got to go point A to point B, draw a straight line. It's really working with the contours and the topography of the land. This is an example of one where we've got the trail alignment on the side slope along the hillside as we're moving along the Berryessa Peak Trail. And this alignment I chose because we actually wanted to keep people off the ridge proper, because there's more chance of someone getting lost if they're on the ridge, because the ridge had a bunch of intersecting fire roads that took you off into private property. So people could get lost. But if we moved just slightly off the ridge and built the dedicated footpath, you wouldn't see those other areas where you might go. And your views of the canyon and of the lake in the distance were just greatly enhanced. Plus, you can see these ways that I would contour the trail around the curve so that you would always have new views kind of expressing themselves as you'd go around a bend and open up to a view, and go around a bend and open up to another view. So you want to pick those spots, like where this person is standing, where they're kind of in between the vegetation, right? So you see how I've aligned this right in between this vegetation so that when you open up, you feel very centered in there. You naturally want to hit that center point in between the vegetation and open up into those vistas. Similarly, views of things like rock outcroppings and having the trail alignment such that your views of these things, even if it's at particular times of year, like in this case, looking at the Blue Ridge from the Frog Pond Trail alignment, where you get these amazing sunsets that light up entire areas of ridges. And when you're in these particular spots in the trail, you get views like this. Here back again at Valley Vista, continued reveal of the Cape Valley. As you begin to switch back up the sides of the mountain, you gain views of Cache Creek, Camp Haswell, and as you go higher, it starts opening up views of the valley. And so really making that trail alignment to where you're not only looking at what the topography of the land is and sort of that micro scale, but you're zooming out at the macro scale and what are my views everywhere else. So you're constantly doing that as you're moving up and down the hillside. And a lot of times literally moving up and down the hillside and figuring out, what alignment I'm going to like best. Then alignment of the trail sometimes too to parallel other things, like paralleling the river, paralleling the highway, so that you feel like you're moving with those other modes of travel, but you're kind of above all of it and looking down. Definitely an experience that when you're working on the trail is very exciting, but also when you're walking it, it's just really enjoyable and feels very natural. I tend to like to feel that when I'm moving through the space and creating these trail alignments, that it doesn't feel forced. You want to feel like you're naturally flowing through the landscape. You've probably been on trails historically where it felt very nice and meandering, and then others where where you'd get lost, like you'd get off the trail and go, wait a second, I thought I was just on the trail, and it probably made an abrupt change that you didn't quite notice. So you want to make these where possible, and I have to use that caveat, where possible, not very abrupt changes in the flow. I also like to frame things. In the case of this particular part, this is under construction, and I took this photo to show this alignment. You notice how this really tall pine is right in alignment with this path, right? So while it's making the meandering curve here, this gentle curve to follow the contour of the slope, you're headed toward this as a destination point. And this tree is located right on the spine of a part of the cliff coming down. And that's also a point at which the trail makes a turn. So you have this object that you're headed toward, and it just feels very natural, like you're progressing toward this. Similarly, Vista points like this, and this is on, again, the Valley Vista Trail, where you have these kind of iconic views, spots where you're going to stop and you're going to take a look. And you want to bring people to those points. So you've got these small objects like trees, rocks, things you want to maneuver around that you can get close to and experience. And then there's the broader views that you're looking out toward. And I did this on Valley Vista where I wanted to have alignments where you were looking both east and west, because the canyons are kind of northeast and northwest. And so being able to look up the canyon and then have other views where you're looking down the canyon. Similarly, I like these ideas where you use natural vegetation, rocks, where you create these gateways. So in the case of this particular location, you notice how I'm going right between these two pines. And so it just feels very natural to go between these spaces when you're hiking the trail. So always keeping that in mind when you're doing the layouts, is all of those elements of the visitor experience, which means we tend to walk the trail alignment a lot. And if you look at my GPS, which I always use GPS, now more recently on the phone, because the phones have advanced far enough that it's basically your computer you're carrying with you. But it used to be I'd have a handheld or wrist-mounted Garmin unit that I would use for these trail alignments. And you go out into the field and you'd walk a path and you go, oh, that's pretty good. And then you walk it again and go, nah, I'm going to shift it over a little bit. And a lot of what we use is flagging tape. So in areas where I have brush, I have this blue and white striped flagging tape that you tie on vegetation, and that kind of marks your route. That's your first alignment. And then you walk it a couple times, and if you like it, that's what you'll probably build. If you don't, take the flagging off, find a better alignment, flag it, try it out. You can see this one shot of one of our volunteers, Mike, walking along what would be the future trail alignment, but there's no trail right now. So he's on all fours because it is really, really steep on that side slope. But you see in the distance here, you see these little white dots, and these little white dots are pin flags. So areas where you can't tie blue and white flagging tape around brush, you use little surveying flags and you put those into the ground and you mark your spots as you're walking up and down the hill. This is in Valley Vista. This is where the rocks are, where the staircase crosses through the rocks. If anyone's been in there, this is before the trail was even built, not even a foot of the trail. And here's where there's some switchbacks that look down onto Cache Creek before the switchbacks were built. And we put this row of pin flags in to mark the exact location we were going to build this trail. And we walk it back and forth on this 30-degree side slope. Is that good? Is that good? And then once we'd figured on that alignment, And that's where we would start getting the crews out there to start doing the work. This means walking the trail a lot, back and forth a lot, many trips. So you get to know every rock and every plant on that trail as you start doing that handwork. Now, before I get into some of the nuances of the photographs and sort of what it is we were doing, I want to talk a little about some of the tools, but also some of the design standards that we use. So one of the documents that is kind of the Bible of trail building and trail construction is actually put out by the Forest Service. And this is their Trail Construction and Maintenance Handbook. I'm going to drop a link in the chat here, and folks can download this if you like. This is a wonderful comprehensive guide to how to build a trail. And because this is the USDA Forest Service, it actually has things in there that are well beyond the kind of techniques we are doing here, because this is built for the entire nation, right? This guidebook. So it will have things on, water crossings, of which I wish we had more up here, more water, but most of what we do is literally just digging the trail out of the earth. They've got a lot of things like log crib walls and rock retaining walls, all kinds of things that any forest in the United States they might encounter, they have here. So for those of us that are real trail nerds, I recommend sit down and have a good read. I think you can actually order a copy of it. And so you'll see these little hash marks on it. This is the actual side. In fact, do I have a copy? I do. Here, one moment. We actually have, all right, don't blur on me. There we go. A copy of it. So it comes out as a much smaller book. I think the idea is it's supposed to be pocket sized for when you're building the trail. And it kind of, is a flip book, but it is a publication you can order from the USDA if you don't want to print out 8.5 by 11s, cut them all down. I have a couple copies of this, and one that's like the field copy, and one that's the nighttime bedstand reading copy. So this guidebook, part of what we use in terms of trail construction is something we call full bench construction for what we do in terms of how we design it. So a full bench means that rather than having any part of the trail be fill, so when you're digging on the slope, the back slope, and you're pulling that soil down to make the trail tread, that usually is disposed of down the side of the hill, right? So it goes a few feet off the trail. They have something called partial bench construction, which is where you end up with some of that excavated hillside down on the bottom as fill. The problem with that, particularly with the soils that we have, is that a lot of times that will really settle and compact, and you'll end up with this kind of like sloughed off side, and really all that's left of the trail, the walkable slope, is this tiny little piece in here. So while it is a little bit more work and a little bit more excavation to do a full bench, it's much more stable long term. And again, particularly the soils that we have here, very, very light once you've actually excavated them out off the hillside. So you'll find that most of our trails look like this. It's a full tread where all of this is the dimension, and we try to get that to be about 18 inches wide for a footpath, and then your back slope. And your back slope, you want to taper really gently back into the existing slope. You try not to have it be vertical, because if you do that, it's going to slough off and collapse onto your trail. Now, the exception to that is sometimes you get these really, really rocky soils where a near vertical slope will hold up just fine, because it's mostly, rocks and things. And we had a few sections of the Berryessa Peak Trail like that. But most of what we have through the oak woodland grassland will try and slope that back slope back to be fairly shallow. So this guidebook gives you a lot of the guidance for what your back slope should be, your rise over your run. I'm not going to get into all the technical details, because again, you got the link. You can do this yourself now if you want to study all of what it takes to get in they talk about creating stable back slopes. So for our volunteers, we start going up the hill, and they start building that tread. So here they are building the full bench construction, pulling the soil down here, and then we'll spread it into the grass here so that we get a nice fine layer of soil. We don't like to leave big clumps on the edge, because that's the same as if you were working in your garden and you're trying to make the perfect rooting material for your vegetables. If we leave a bunch of this very nice friable soil on the edge of the trail, that is where your weeds are going to go 3 times as tall as anywhere else. So we want to spread that material out so we don't create that perfect seed bed for the soil. We want a nice scraped flat level tread, and all that waste soil we want to push down the slope into a thin fine layer. Here you can see them getting a little bit further along in the trail construction. So they start off, they do a real rough cut, right? And the way that I like to do it is, since I'm figuring out the alignment, you can see these white flags here. I usually start with a more coarse tool. Basically, it's a big thick hoe, or something called a mattock, which is basically a very thin hoe, but sort of long and really good for cutting and just pulling a bunch of material at once, but it doesn't do a fine tread. It's really for doing a rough cut and moving that initial soil and cutting that initial scratch. And so what I'll do is I'll be the one doing the alignment in the front, and then we'll be followed by the rest of the crews using these tools called McLeods. And McLeods, as you can see here, it's a rake on one side and a flat, long, wide hoe on the other, anywhere from 10 to 12 inches wide. And this is a firefighting tool used for grubbing out stumps, smaller stumps, and for cutting fire lines and moving brush. But it's also one of the primary trail building tools because its versatility. You can use that diagonal to cut and grub stuff out. You keep a sharp edge on that flat. You can cut grass out, particularly bunch grass or anything that's clumped right at the roots. You can scrape real nice, flat, hard tread. You can scrape leaves off if you've got to get down to soil. So it's got a lot of uses, and it's not terribly heavy. You can see here the views, looking down, but also the steepness on which we're operating. So this particular section of trail that you're looking at, those guys working on is right in here, where you see these switchbacks in here. And the reason that we had to put the trail alignment in this location is that you can see how, getting down, we're following up the spine right here. The side slopes right here is just rock cliffs, nowhere to go. There's big rock cliffs over on this side too, and then it gets really steep. So being able to get up and around this mountain necessitated that we switch back and do this serpentine path up this spine. One of the things that the county parks planner at the time wanted us to do, and it's not highlighted in here, but it is part of the trail system, is he really wanted the trails to go through the rocks. And in order to get through these rocks, we had to build this staircase in there. And we figured not everybody would want to climb the staircase when going in there. So we made this bypass, which takes a little bit longer to get past this segment, but we could do it all with just earthwork instead of having to build stairs. So this is a part where the trail splits right when we get to this landing up here. But in doing so, of course, we've got these switchbacks in here to be able to get up a very steep slope. It wasn't until we got a little bit further that we were able to get this segment in here. And this is actually interesting because this line work is old, and it actually shows you the distinction between planning and what actually gets built. So this particular orange line right here, this is the alignment that I originally thought when doing the design from the desktop would probably work. And when we actually got out there and built the thing, you can see I started from the same intersection, but I came up a little bit higher and then did more hugging of the topography, bending around here instead of climbing. And then we actually bent out and around quite a bit more. And it wasn't until we looped around this section that we actually hooked in, and the segment that I had originally designed at my desk was very close to what we ended up actually building. So that gives you a really good example of how conditions in the field are always going to be different, even with Google Earth, which is a fantastic tool, because it used to just be me in a quad map kind of going, well, those topography looks good, the contours look good, but it's not until you actually get out there in the field that you go, yeah, this alignment is a little better if we do it a little down slope from where I thought it might be. So I tend to do that where I design at my desk and then I go out in the field to field check it. And I don't know that it saves so much of a step as much as just tells me where I am relative to where I thought I should be. And so that kind of checking on what you're doing, I think, is really important, that iterative checking with the trail. Let's jump back to here. Okay, before I get to the next one, I'm going to talk first about which sections you're looking at. So there are different colors of section of trail here. Part of what we do when we're trying to build a trail system is see what we have already out there. And these red ones, these red lines right here, these are existing fire breaks. So there's a fire break that goes up here past county property all the way up to what we call Rumsey Knob, which is this hilltop right here, which has beautiful, beautiful views of the Capay Valley, which you can see right here. And ultimately, what we would like to connect, you can see there's another fire break that continues on, and that's a more recent fire break from when we first started working on this trail. It gets to about here, and ultimately we can get up to the Blue Ridge Trail if we create a linkage that will connect up with, and if we zoom in close enough here, you can see the existing Blue Ridge Trail up here on BLM. That's in the future. The way I've looked at this is as soon as we're done with building the remaining trails here at Valley Vista, then we'll start working with the BLM on their permissions process to build this linkage to go up to Blue Ridge, and then hopefully another linkage coming down from this side to connect to Valley Vista. So you'd have even larger loops and series of loops to do. That's kind of a really key thing with trails. Up and back is okay. Loops are much more enjoyable. When we first built this first segment of Valley Vista, it was to build this spine. So we got up here to a grove of oak trees where we worked with an Eagle Scout and built this, which is a picnic table right here. And then that was your destination, right? Go to the top of the hill, have your view of the Capay Valley, then walk back down. Our next phase was to build the loop. Now, because of the steepness of this spine, this was all we could fit within this zone. But once we got up to where we could get away from these cliff faces down here, we could actually look at building the continuity of this loop up to create this lasso loop up here. And so the next step that we did was to build this segment, this orange one right here. And then concurrent with that, we built this series of switchbacks over here, because while the fire road does go down this is a very steep segment. When they build these fire roads, it's just a bulldozer and gravity. So a lot of times it's not conducive to hiking. So those things that are will retain, and those things that aren't will provide an alternative route that's better for the user. Then after doing this one, we worked with an Eagle Scout to build this green section here. So this is our most recent one that we just completed a year ago. And this was another half mile that, combined with this existing fire break, gave you another mile of trail. So again, we're leveraging half mile of construction to create a full mile inner loop. This existing fire break goes up here, and you can use that by parking just across the bridge across Cache Creek, walking up this trail. And then once you're up here, you can do this mile loop that includes the ridge top and the valley further back. But our next set of projects are to create this longer loop around the backside of the canyon. And we're currently working with the county on the final permissions for that. What that will do is create this entire backside loop that you can start from the parking here just across the bridge, or that you can start over here at Haswell and you can walk up the mountain and through the canyon and down the canyon and back up the mountain again and back. And so then you see how we've created a series of different loops that one can do depending on how strenuous a trip they want to have. When this is fully completed, we'll update the maps and be able to give, one, distances as well as sort of estimated difficulties depending on which direction folks want to go. Then the last one that we've got, and I'm kind of building these in difficulty of hardest to easiest, because as I'm getting older, I'm finding things that I thought were easier are harder for me to build physically. So the very last trail that I have in my repertoire on this park is what we're calling the family loop. And this is one that only goes about halfway up the hill, if that, and will loop back around to the parking area on the side of the road. And this will just be like a 1 mile loop, take people up to some rock formations up there and loop around. So the idea is if you've got smaller kids, or like me, your back went out recently, you don't want to go as far, you'll be able to do that. So one of the things that we talked about was building these trails using, the full bench construction. But sometimes we end up with scenarios where we have to do something a little bit more difficult. And that showed up right here. So right here, I don't know if the image can show you as well, but you see all that that's in shadow. All that that's in shadow is pretty much vertical. That is cliffs. And as we were trying to make this trail alignment, and as I was scouting it, I was trying to find a way for us to get from one side of the mountain over here to the back side of the mountain over here without having to go all the way up to the ridge, because I wanted to make a loop. And once you get up right here, you're functionally almost at the ridge. The distance between these trails is very, very, very little. But the only place that I could functionally find that it was even possible to cross these cliffs right here that go sheer down to the highway was this one little section that has this alignment. And that section was right here. And I think the look that this volunteer has on his face is kind of the look that all of us had as we were working on this. Very, very narrow little footpath that we've got here. And what I'm standing on is actually a rock. So this is the one spot that I could find to get across these sheer cliffs. And it's just a spine of rock going down. And unfortunately, you're looking at something that's about 5 feet higher than down here, right? So we could build a tread along the back side of that slope, and then we just hit this rock face that was about 5 feet higher and pretty vertical. And I didn't like the idea of people having to scramble up that, because you really start to exclude a lot of potential users when you create a rock scramble like that. So we had to start building that slope up and chipping away at it. So here we are standing, from this photo, I am standing on top of this rock here that's next to this pine. And I'm looking back down at where my tool had been sitting, but now they are stacking boulders. And so we were taking boulders from this back slope here, and we were moving them by hand up here and starting to build up all of this wall. And this guy is about 4 feet higher than the original grade, because we started with a large boulder and just began building lifts upon lifts of rock. Then, as we moved just to the other side of that rock, we had to start chipping into the side of the mountain to create a footpad wide enough for us to stand on. And so you go down below here, you're sliding all the way down to the highway. And you stand right there, and it was not terribly consolidated. So we had to cut a huge amount of this all by hand, of this back slope, and start stacking rocks and compacting by hand all of the dirt that would create the trail tread. This is looking back. See if I can zoom in here. Oh, sorry, different window. There we go. This section right here, again, that rock, now we've only got a couple feet between the landing and that rock, whereas before we had about 5. You can see how we've built all of this material up right here before we got to where it was a more easily buildable trail tread, before we got to this just vertical cliff coming out there. And then here we are, not quite done. You can see all this exposed rock right here. In order for us to gain just a little bit of width on that tread, we have to cut quite a bit of rock out of that face. On the plus side, all this rock we pull out of this face, we can then start stacking on this side and using to buttress the edge of the trail. So here we are, gently hugging the edge of this cliff. And here's that rock again, or he's actually standing next to it. He's actually standing on it, and we built up around it to create this trail tread. Here we are as we cut all of that boulder that you saw in the, sorry, let me go one back. So all this boulder here we are looking back. There's that tree. Remember that tree that I said was the focal point of that one set of trail before we make the bend? You get to that tree, you make the bend, and head up toward this segment of trail that we've been using to hug the slope here. And you can see how we've built up about 4 to 5 feet right here of rock material and fine material behind it as the backfill. And here we are continuing to build up this ledge. Now he's standing, it's almost full height, and the rock that he started from was right back here. And what he's standing on right here is about 4.5 to 5 feet higher than it was to begin with. But in order to make that transition, because there really was no room to stack any rocks, there was nothing that would hold it, because he's basically got 1 foot hanging over the air right here. We had to remove this large set of boulders in order to make this a straight shot. Here we are near the completion, and the gentleman that was standing there looking at it going, oh boy, we got to start this. Same individual looking at our completed work. It took us about 3 to 4 trips just to work on this one about 50 to 70 foot segment of trail. Generally, we make tremendous progress when we're just working in dirt in oak woodland. We can get to like 40 feet per person per hour production rate. But when you hit some of these more craft zones, more fine production zones, you take a little bit longer. And this next series shows him walking up and over the rock. So you see all of this built up material. We had to move all of this by hand. There's that rock that we were looking at the very beginning. Here he is just quickly and easily walking up to the top. And that, to go back to the beginning to show that tremendous difference, this is what he is standing on in that final photograph. And this is that sheer face. And here we are at the very, very end, with all of that filled in, and anyone able to walk that now. I should say anyone who's not afraid of heights, because it is pretty vertical beyond the trail itself. Although, and so a lot of folks said, like, Andrew, what are you doing? This is pretty crazy. I said, well, look at the views. And they're like, yeah, you got me there. The views are pretty amazing. Plus I said, I spent my whole youth backpacking in the Sierra, and I'm like, trails on cliffs like this is just, that's everywhere up there. So it may not be as common up in the Coast Range here, but for what I'm used to, this is par for the course. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're completely done, right? We built the trail tread. Now we've got to put in trail markers, signs, things like that. So what I like to do is use an old external frame pack and some ratchet straps, and I'll put in all the lumber we have to carry up. In this case, pre-routed trail markers that we had to put in various locations along the trails wherever we have intersections. We also built the sign here for the park itself, but that was easy to install because that was right next to the car. But the trail markers, we had to lug up the side of the hill. And I've done quite a bit of this lugging up the hill. And the only thing I can say is it's just 1 foot in front of the other, go slow. And it gets lighter as you go up the hill because you keep dropping off trail markers the further you get up. So by the time you get to the top, you're carrying one. However, since we started this, we have had a lot of fires. I think this thing is burned like 3 times. So that just tends to mean that things like stairs tend to burn. So this is one stair segment on a steeper part of a switchback where 3 out of 4 of the stairs burned up. And here it is after we repaired the stairs immediately after the fire. And this was actually the LNU fire that burned up these. So just a couple years ago, we repaired it during COVID. As soon as the place opened. So I think this was in August after they had put the fire out, and it was no longer an issue in this zone. I'm still using these wood treads in a lot of places. They tend not to burn that often. This was a bit of a fluke that those 3 burned, just because they're kind of embedded in the soil. And so usually the grass burns and the embers just don't have a place to catch. But in this case, it was just so hot with that LNU fire with the wind, it burned them entirely. But we didn't lose all of them. We didn't lose much in the rocks, I think 1 or 2, and we've got those replaced. But I've started shifting to metal posts for trail markers just because we are getting more frequent fires. And so I've really been going with just galvanized steel posts pounded with a post pounder into the ground and using stickers for directional arrows, because I figure if I got to replace the stickers, I just hike up with a pack of stickers. Much easier as I get older, versus having to carry all the posts in. So on the Berryessa Peak Trail, all the trail markers on that trail, including the wooden fence crossing, burned. And we replaced it with a metal staircase and metal posts. And that was after the county fire. And then I believe it was 2 years later, we had the LNU fire burn through the same area. The LNU fire burned through the area, but did not damage our metal posts that we put in after the county fire. So thank God we didn't have any work we had to do after that. So I'm kind of shifting to that. And if you do take the Valley Vista Trail, you'll find a bench up there that's a metal bench built by Eagle Scout, also survived the LNU fire flawlessly because it's metal. So it's sort of this unfortunate reality. I really like the natural look of wood materials, wood benches and such, but the frequency of fire is such that just the replacement that it requires is necessitating us moving to metal. And lastly, come on out and build a trail with us, because it is a hell of a lot of fun. Doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter your ability. We had someone come on a trail project with us who he only had 1 arm, and he was up there in the front of the pack, and he was swinging the mattock because he was doing kind of the gross earth moving, right? Because he goes, look, I don't have the finesse here with the 1 arm. I need the 2 for McLeod work. But he was in the front, following the line, working just as hard as everybody else. We've had folks in their 70s. We've had kids as young as parents can bribe them with Oreos to get up the next hill, and everything in between. I hope that this 1 hour crash course in trail processes and construction, kind of specific to our areas. Obviously, I didn't cover every type of material or method. There are mini excavators and trail tractors that people use for commercial trail building. There's a lot more masonry work people do in state parks and such. This has really been an emphasis on community build. What can we do with minimal resources, minimal tools, but maximum volunteer power? So do we have any questions?
I don't know if you want to go ahead and put your, if you're comfortable unmuting yourself and asking questions, that's totally fine with me.
Yeah, or putting it in the chat.
Yeah, or put it in the chat. Andrew, I am like so impressed. I've hiked and been on trails, and yeah, there's a trail. I never ever imagined the work that goes into it. And stacking those rocks, how do you get them to stay?
Well, so stacking those rocks, that was, let me tell you, the only time that we've ever had any, let's use the phrase incident, was on that rock stacking zone, not because of the rocks, but because someone lost their footing and slid down a ways down the hill. Didn't end up getting injured. They just got a bit of a scare. They went down maybe 50 feet, but sliding on their butt, wearing jeans. And then I went down with a rope and got them and came back up. I did lose a pair of loppers because of that slip, because the person dropped the loppers and the loppers kept going down the mountain, and I wasn't going to be able to get them. But the way that we do it is it's a combination of science and art. You look at what you have to start with material wise, like where you're going to start your wall. And so the first thing you do is you say, where's the most stable place to start this? And generally that's finding large embedded boulders that are already in the side of the cliff, right? And then digging a little bit into the slope above those boulders to key in the rocks. And then you start putting in large boulders, as large as you can get, into those spaces on top of the immediate large boulders that are embedded into the existing soil, and your location sitting on top of them. And you try and put those in and find the right shapes that kind of settle and are sitting properly so they're not wiggling around. And then you shim them with smaller rocks and pack dirt in there to really kind of like as your mortar, if you will. And you do that course by course with a slow batter to build that. Now, I'm not as good a stone builder as other folks like, Bam Bam is, or some of the CCC crews, or some of the commercial trail guys that do this all the time. Those guys are artists. They can see things like puzzle pieces, right? And they start going, that rock here, that rock there, that rock there. Or they have the tools where they chip the rocks and spend, tremendous amount of times doing that. My method I like to do, just again, because of limited time, is, like I say, I find good big flat rocks. I really want the flat ones because that's easiest to stack other rocks on top of. You get it wedged into place. You get those rocks in, you pack in the dirt layer, and then you put the next course of rocks in, and you kind of do it along the length at a time, slowly building back, and then constantly checking to make sure it's stable and punching on it and making sure it doesn't wiggle. And I'm happy to do that myself because I know kind of like when I can tell something's going to give, so that I know to step back in case it does. And we did have a number of them where we started out thinking we had it on a pretty good rock, and then we'd get 3 layers up, and the lower ones start to give way, and we'd have to pull the layers and then knock that loose rock out and then start again, basically. And getting enough of that mass of earth and rock that when you put a person's weight on the trail, there's so much mass beneath them hugging that hillside that it's not going to go. Now, that's not to say that sometimes things don't happen. This was rather interesting. We didn't lose a section of that rock buttress, but it was actually just around the corner from it where it was just earth dug into the slope. And what had happened is that when we had the LNU fire go through, it burned all the vegetation, including manzanita and such, off the slope and down into the root system. And then that actually caused a dry landslide. It was not rain-based. I mean, there's landslides in these hills all the time because they're a young mountain range. They're highly erosive. So you get a big gully washer and you literally wash the gully, right? You have erosion come down. And so sometimes that'll hit a trail and take out a little segment. You got to regrade it. In this case, and I'd not seen anything like this, and I'm sure it's terribly common, but in terms, again, my experience just working up in this area, where a whole section of hillside would just go away because a fire went through. And it was all about the fact that the roots weren't holding the soil anymore. So that was an odd one. So there are repairs that one has to do. And I kind of alluded to that with the fire and the harder repairs. But a lot of what we've had to deal with these trail projects these days hasn't been so much like washouts from rain, because we build them. If you build them with just a little bit of outslope as a full tread, it's really stable. So they'll hold. And you build it with rolling dips. So you don't just build a straight shot. You have it undulate. And if it undulates, it sheds water more frequently in the little sub watersheds between those undulations. So it doesn't get a chance to really concentrate and start scouring. So we don't have a ton of problem with that if we built it right. But it's fire and then deadfall, right? It's logs across the trail, or worse, dead tree, but it's the canopy part of the tree that landed on the trail. So instead of just cutting through the stump, or the main trunk, you go like, geez, I got to cut through the whole center section. So this section did have quite a bit of deadfall over the last couple of fires that we've had to come in and cut. And Berryessa Peak Trail has been the same way. And what we tend to find is it's like you have a fire go through and you have these things either fall over immediately, or it takes a while for it to die and the roots to rot, and then it falls over. So it could be 10 years from now and a dead tree falls over, right? 10 years from an event. And so that's where shifting to like chainsaws, or a lot of times I like to carry a come along, which is basically a very small portable winch, but like with a 10,000 pound capacity. And so a lot of times you can winch these things out of the way, which I actually prefer to do because chainsaws are such a pain, because they're heavy, and then you got to have bar oil and spare bar and a sharpening tool and gasoline. You got to carry all that up the side of the mountain just to cut, a few branches out of the way. So I tend to focus on hand saws for smaller stuff, and then working with a group of people. If you get like 6 people, you'd be surprised at what you can push out of the way with 6 people. And a lot of that has to do really with letting gravity do the work and with pivoting in the right location with the tree. So a lot of times we'll look at it and figure out where we got to make the pivot points. And so then we'll get the crew in the right location and they'll just push it off the trail. And so long as it's off the trail, that's fine, right? It doesn't need to be far away from the trail or anything like that. As long as it's safe, that log can be moved. So there's that. And like I say, using a pry bar as a lever and moving it that way. And a lot of times it's a multi-step process where you will put a rock under a pry bar as a lever, and then you'll get it up off the ground, and then you put a few more rocks underneath, and then you can get the pry bar in, and then you can push forward and rotate it off. So a lot of different techniques like that when you're trying to do repair. But I'm finding post-fire, there's a lot of that kind of vegetation management. And, in some ways, the fires are helping us build trails to be more resilient. Like I said, it lets you see that you put in the right alignment, that you got it on stable ground, that you're dealing with the vegetation correctly, that you put in the right materials for your trail posts so that you don't have to rebuild them again. So it's changed a little of our mindset. And that just, that comes with experience, right? You get burned by literally one fire and you go, okay, what am I going to do differently next time? Whereas when I first started this, we were not getting as frequent fires. And so I was thinking more from a designer standpoint of, wood, everything, it's going to look gorgeous. It blends in with the natural material. Well, my position has changed. Now the things are right. Every other year, it's like metal's good.
But I've seen you carry metal stairs up the slope too. That's not fun.
Yeah, that was to replace the wooden stairs, but I only had to carry those metal stairs once. So that's the key. I had to carry the wooden stairs once, then I had to carry the metal stairs once. Now it's done. No more of that carrying.
Good point.
Yeah. And I had to drag, I've used myself like a mule quite a bit. I don't know if Nate showed you those photos. I don't have them because I didn't take the picture, but it was the one where I was dragging the lumber along the north end trail to get to the bridge that we had to fix, the handrails that had burned in the fire. And in that case, the key was, it was a level trail, so I could drag 10-foot long lumber, a mile and a half or however long we had to go, because it was level. If I had to go up a hill, I would. Yeah.
I haven't seen him, but I will ask about him and I'll
ask about that. Yeah. I got most of the way there before I had to get his assistance in kind of like putting a strap under the back end and just getting it enough off of the ground to overcome the resistance, because I was that had happened just after I'd had my back go out. So I was pushing myself when I shouldn't have. But if I hadn't had my back go out, I could have. Not saying one caused the other.
I believe you. I believe you. Well,
I at least have the photographs of my endeavors. So.
I believe you. I'm not arguing. I've seen you in action.
So yeah, I would say for folks, we're going to be building these next few segments of Valley Vista. Starting, I think we're going to probably start with this back end back here, which I'm really looking forward to exploring. This is going to be an interesting one because, again, you see how there are these just vertical erosion areas, but we've ID'd a few spots where we're going to be able to make it across the channel. I think it's going to create some pretty amazing section of trail, and your view will then be up the canyon from the opposite side, and then we'll link this thing around. And I may get kind of excited and do a little bonus connector between these two. I haven't decided yet, but the cool part about this is the county is thrilled because we're building these for them, and I'm thrilled because I need a project, and I like doing this stuff and giving back because the previous generation built trails for me. I'm building trails for the current and future generations. So I get a thrill out of this because I get to go up and hike all my favorite trails that I didn't have to build, but somebody built for me, even though they didn't know me. I'm doing the same for the next group, but I love the design and exploration of doing this and getting back into a place without a trail and then to build it and see all the happy families walking up. The residents of Rumsey, we've come across numerous times hiking these trails, and they love them. They just absolutely love them. So that's been really heartening, is to see local folks enjoying these projects that Tuleyome's been doing. So this is the next one we're looking at, flagging this fall and then starting building immediately. Because like I said, we've got the environmental work done. We just haven't put the precise alignment out yet. We expect to do that when the weather starts cooling down. Nate and I may go up before then, even though it'll be a little hot, and flag this lower section because it won't be as difficult to do that hike, right? To parallel, 1 mile little loop. But this stuff that we'll be doing up here is going to be a lot of bushwhacking and back and forth and really hot exposed terrain. And that's always a funny thing. People go like, why are you building a trail here? This is like really miserable to walk. I'm like, it's going to be good when there's a trail. It's miserable now that you're knee deep in chaparral.
Yeah, chaparral is not fun to walk through.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And if you ever did like Annie's trail, when I flagged that whole thing, I was doing most of that on my hands and knees and doing an army crawl.
Picking ticks out of your ears, probably.
I don't mind that. The problem was when I was doing an army crawl and I came 5 feet face to face with a coiled rattlesnake that was, like this thick around, and then I army crawling back. But so people always worry if I get worried about that. And I'm like, what's not to love about an animal that warns you that it's mad?
Right. Right.
Yeah. I'm like, oh. I mean, granted, you got to change your shorts after you hear that high-pitched rattle, but I'll take that over.
You didn't run into any mice.
Bites you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if there's a mouse on my hat, that's when I get worried.
So you're going to start that construction next fall, you think?
Yeah. As soon as it gets cool enough. The first thing will be to flag it. So I suspect this will probably take. I'll give myself 2 trips. I think 1 might be a bit generous. I like to do 1 trip, flag it, and then go back and walk it again just to like start fresh. Because what I always find is near the end of the flagging day, I'm a little bit more loose on my alignment because I'm tired. So then when I go back fresh, I'll first walk the part that I walked the last time, and then I can look at it with fresh eyes and then adjust alignments as necessary. So doing that in the fall, and then by the time, November, December, let's give ourselves some room. By the time December hits, we'll be building this thing. Totally.
So if anybody wants to pitch in, keep an eye on our website, because that will definitely be on there. We're looking for help. Sure.
We will have that in abundance. And I got to give a lot of thanks to the Eagle Scouts. We had, let me think how many we had here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Eagle Scout projects were part of this. So I had them build the overlook picnic table bench here at the summit. Actually, sorry, right here at the oak trees. Had them build some trail markers. Had them build the the overlook bench, and then they were the lead on this section of trail. So I worked directly with the 17-year-old Eagle Scout candidate, and we flagged all of this. And then he brought crews out for work days that we also had as Tuleyome work days, but he had to bring his troop out. And this was kind of cool to have a senior before they turn 18 to build a half-mile segment of trail.
That'll be there forever.
Yeah, this ain't going away. This is a county park, and it's a beautiful, I love this backside. I mean, I love all of it. This is the problem, is I'll keep telling you, it's every time I'm out there, I'll be like, this is my favorite part.
No, this is my favorite. No, this is my favorite part.
20 feet is my favorite part. Wait till the next 20 feet. I'll tell you, because this particular park, there's so much that's happening in so little of an area. Some areas out here, we really have broad landscape scale stuff. Like when you're on the Blue Ridge proper, it's rolling and it's gorgeous, but it's kind of the same view as you're moving through it, which is to say it's an amazing view. But in a place like this, you've got the first set of views as you do the switchbacks up and you're looking down at Camp Haswell. Then you have the first view when you see the backside, when you cross over. Then you have the view from right here where you're doing the switchback and you're looking down Highway 16, which is another design element that I did intentionally. I lined up all these return angles of the switchback with the highway so that when you're walking it, you're looking right down the highway. So it's like you're walking the trail, and then as the slope drops off, the highway disappears under the slope. So it looks like the trail becomes the highway. So that was an intentional design feature. Of course, now that you know this, you'll know that to look for that, but hopefully it just intrinsically makes you feel happy, but you don't even know the design intent behind it. But that's the idea. So, so you have that view where you first get the view of the Cape Valley, which is also where you end up getting the first view of the Sutter, or the Sutter Buttes out here. And then when you do the backside along here, you no longer see the Cape Valley, but you're really intimate with the canyon down below in the rapids of Cache Creek. And then when you get to this location here, which is really funny because I zoom in here and you see that little dot right there, that silver thing, that's the metal bench that the Eagle Scout put in. And they put that there because that was one of my favorite views, looking down the canyon right at the highway. So you're the same thing, you're lined up, it's as if the highway is coming right at you and disappears around the bend. So it's like you're looking right down the highway and you're looking right down that set of rapids right there. So that's kind of this little like 20-foot spur off the switchback where you can sit and just kind of enjoy the view. And then of course you have that rock crossing, right, which is its own thrill. And then you get to the backside back here, this further backside of Pocket Canyon, and you're looking up this sort of untrammeled canyon, right? And then that's a really intimate space. And then the trail that the Eagle Scout worked on takes you into that canyon and into this little hidden oak grove back here, which actually survived all the fires thus far. And our trail weaves around that oak grove there and then takes you switch back up and you pop out on top of the ridge. And now you're looking at the Central Valley. So all these different experiences reveal themselves as you're experiencing the trail. And I expect that there'll be more of those really neat little spaces as we create this next one. So it's kind of fun in a 612, 614 acre park that you have such a diversity of experience, right? And that was the idea, is you got this regional park. Yeah, I mean, 614 acres is nothing to sneeze at, right? But you're surrounded by hundreds of thousands of acres of public land, but you get to experience this one in a much more intimate way than some of the other sort of broad vista landscapes like the Cache Creek Ridge Trail, where it's just endless views for the whole duration, right? Which of course I love and is also my favorite, but you get the idea.
Well, thank you everyone. And if you have any questions,
thanks for coming.
Yeah, please go ahead and email me or email Andrew, and we'll make sure they get answered.
Awesome.
Everybody have a good night. Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody.
See you next time.